Well, yeah, the difference between Iran and the United States is Iran is willing to recognize the United States as a legitimate sovereign country with certain rights and certain boundaries that should be respected. The United States has zero respect for Iran in that regard. They regard Iran as a nation of religious fanatics, and really it's all about Israel. The opposition of the Iranian, the Islamic Republic, to the the ethno-nationalist fascist government that is now Israel, that's the sole hatred of the United States towards Iran. Because Iran, the history of the last, they want to talk about the history. Let's, take an honest look at the history. Iran hasn't been out invading other neighbors. I was listening to someone who was talking, Martin Seif, a former Washington Times reporter, was interviewing this guy. And he was talking about how Iran was launching terrorist attacks on all of its neighbors. Excuse me? The record over the last 40 years is that the Sunni extremists are the ones who are most likely to carry out suicide bombings and attacks on Iran, not the opposite. Really, the Shia are not inclined to do a lot of just random violence against others for being Christian or being Muslim, whatever, not being the right kind of Muslim. But it's been just the opposite with the Sunni crowd. So Iran has been relentlessly demonized without the United States taking responsibility for its own actions. I mean, and we've talked about this before, but starting in 1980, when the Carter administration, there was a secret CIA finding, is what I've been told, that basically the CIA began working against the government of Iran, supporting the government of Iraq, and that so that's where Saddam felt confident that he could launch the attack against Iran in 1980, because the United States was going to back him ultimately, which they did, to the tune of, and realize the irony in all of this. The United States provided Iraq with weapons of mass destruction, chemical weapons. And that war with Iran lasted till 1988. The war stops. A year and a half later, Kuwait is stealing oil from Iraq. At least that was Saddam's belief. So Saddam asked the United States, because he had been working closely with the U.S. intelligence officials. We were giving him aid, economic aid, military aid. So he was like one of our boys. And he asked the April Glaspie, the ambassador, look, they're doing this to us. You guys got a problem if we go take care of it? And her answer was, we don't have a position on that. And then, back to, because I was around for that invasion. I was at State. We actually, ironically, had deployed what was called the Foreign Emergency Support Team, the FEST, to Trinidad and Tobago in mid-July, because there had been a group of Libyan-backed rebels in Trinidad that had taken over the parliament. They'd killed the prime minister. They were holding hostages. So we sent this interagency counterterrorism team down there that got settled through negotiation. There was no further killing. And so we were trying to figure out how to exfil the plane that our guys flew in on. And, you always want to look for some distraction. And, well, that was the morning that Saddam invaded Kuwait. So we go, well, that's a good cover for action. Nobody would pay attention to us going forward. So, but I remember then I didn't really have the depth and the back knowledge about how we had supported Saddam with weapons of mass destruction during the 1980s. That's what I'm saying.
So that kind of gives you an idea of the mindset of the Iranians. Because like the debate, I was just speaking to Mark Conricus, and he's telling me about how the IRGC they're an evil ideological. He didn't use the word evil, but maybe he did. Ideological group, and all they care about is the destruction, is expanding that ideology, exporting it to other countries. You've heard the argument, and the destruction of Israel. But they did say, look, he did make the statement that the supreme leader did meet with his council, even as late as a few years ago, and did talk about the destruction, wiping out Israel.
Did meet with who?
His council. Ali Khamenei met with his council a couple of years ago. That's what Conricus was telling me. He's talked about the destruction.
What is
the Supreme Council? The Supreme Council in Iran.
So Khamenei, but who did he meet with?
I don't know exactly. So he said Khamenei's latest 2-3 years, in 2023, I think the last time he was talking about coming up with a plan to get rid of Israel. You're saying that
that's just
Ali Khamenei never wanted to get rid of Israel.
No, not the way the Israelis. He wants to. The Iranians want to get rid of this Zionist nationalist, this ethno-nationalist state, that where only people who are, identified as Jewish have the rights. Everybody else, second-class citizens.
But how do they get rid of that? How do you get rid of that as another country? Like you have to destroy their government, and you have to do a lot. That's a pretty destructive war.
You do have to. You may have to destroy that government. There are certain governments worth destroying, in my view, because look at. I mean, they accuse.
That's the argument they make, but that's the argument he makes for Iran. I just feel like that argument both sides are making against each other.
So let's turn it around and make it for them. I mean,
that's what I fact.
70,000 dead. There's not 70,000 dead Iranians. The number they keep coming up with. Oh, they killed 5,000 Iranians. No, they killed 20. No, 35,000. No, it's 45,000 in 1 week. Come on. It's the propaganda. I would have far more sympathy for the Israeli argument about, hey, we're a nation. Yeah, you have a right to be a nation, but you're worse than, the Islamic Republic exists as an Islamic Republic, except Jews are allowed, Christians are allowed, and they're not persecuted or prosecuted, despite Western claims to the contrary. In fact, I'm right now trying to set up an interview with one of the leaders of the Jewish community in Tehran, which is, it's been there for, 2,500, 2,600 years. So again, and with all the changes that Iran has gone through, but, it's hilarious that the Israelis like to make the terrorism argument when they're the ones that funded Hamas to carry out terrorism for the express purpose of preventing Palestinians from actually having this.
Look, there's another thing I didn't have a chance to ask Conricus. I'll do it again. We do a lot of interviews. Is we talk about dismantling Iran's nuclear program, which I support. I don't know what your stance is. I've never asked you that question, whether you believe Iran does have the right to have a nuclear weapon. But my counter argument to him, before you answer that question, my counter argument to him is like, I don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. But the non-proliferation treaty, Israel's not even a signatory to it.
Yeah. Why does Iran have a right to have a nuclear weapon? Why does Iran have a right? Why does Israel have a right to have a nuclear weapon?
Exactly. I think none of them. What's your position? Should both or neither of them have one?
No, I'm against nuclear proliferation across the board. I think expanding those kinds of weapons creates great risk. But to just arbitrarily sit down and say, "Oh, Israel can have one and Iran can't." If Iran has one, then that reduces the chance that Israel is going to attack it, and vice versa. Because why would Iran attack Israel with Israel sitting there with a nuclear weapon?
Yeah.
Nobody's attacking Pakistan. Well, India and Pakistan, they each have nukes. They know the limits that they can go. But North Korea, they're not lining up to attack that. So, but it's been a red herring. That was what, these negotiations supposedly collapsed on. Oh, Iran's trying to get a nuke. We have evidence from history in the last 46 years that Iran, when confronted with someone using a weapon of mass destruction against it, did not retaliate by building the weapon of mass destruction and then using it. And that was when Iraq was attacking Iran with chemical weapons. Iran didn't turn around and say, "Oh, we're getting hit by that. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, mustard gas for mustard gas." No, they refused to do it because it was against Islam. So I give them, they're serious about that part of their religion. that there's certain things you don't do because it is a sin in the eyes of God, which is what Ali Khamenei had been saying for years about nuclear weapons. Iran certainly had the technical, scientific capability, the engineering capability to do it, but they said they wouldn't for religious reasons.
Either religious or pragmatic reasons as well. They knew that if they start building a nuclear weapon, they've always wanted to avoid a war with the US. At least that's my position. And it just really looks like it based on their actions since the death of Soleimani, the killing of Soleimani, the 12-day war, the strikes during the 12-day war. Iran's always tried to be more restrained. I've spoke to two people today that made that point. Two of them were part of many negotiations in the region. One of them was Alan Irie, who was part of the JCPOA negotiations. The other one you might know is Aaron David Miller, who worked for the State Department. He was part of a lot of the negotiations over many years in that region. And both made the argument, they both told me, like, Mario, Iran's been very restrained, not only recently, not only during the 12-day war in their response to the American strike on their nuclear program and their nuclear facilities, but even before that, going back to all the way back to Qasem Soleimani. So trying to understand their mindset and where we are right now in the negotiations, we're in a pretty difficult position. Before putting ourselves in Iran's shoes, which I'm sure you'll help us do, is it too early to say the negotiations are dead? Do you think that what I said earlier, I think we said it on the show before the show, that this is part of the process, kind of both sides testing each other and seeing who blinks first?
Well, I would say the negotiations are dead as long as the United States refuses to recognize and accept what are Iran's non-negotiable terms. And those terms are, as they laid them out in the 10-point, so-called 10-point plan, that number one, they've got sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz and will continue to exercise sovereignty over that. And they reserve the right to charge a fee for people, any shipping company wants to come in or out. That's number one. They want an end, a security guarantee that there will be no more attacks against them, as well as an end to the war in Lebanon, and no more attacks on the Houthis or the Iraqis. And they want all their frozen assets released. Those are the critical demands.
The sanctions as well, or not anymore?
Oh yeah, no, and all the sanctions. Oh, of course, all the sanctions lifted,
and the nuclear program,
and that they retain the right to enrich uranium, but remain part of the NPT, and will allow IAEA inspections, which goes back to that's what JCPOA was all about.
Yeah.
So
JCPOA capped it at below 4%, 3.6 or whatever.
Right. Well, they went up to 60% only after the United States walked away from it, and they did that in a way to try to pressure the West. Hey, if you don't abide by this, then we're going to ramp up. So come back and let's keep the agreement on track, which the West chose not to. So if the West finally gets to a point, which I think they may, because the economic situation is going to continue to worsen, it's going to get worse and worse, and then the West is going to be desperate for a deal. Now, Iran is in a way, maybe they didn't intend it this way, but their attack on the U.S. military bases in the Gulf region is leading to the evacuation of the U.S. forces. So their demand that the U.S. forces withdraw, that's being accomplished because Iran is attacking those bases.
So it's not one of their demands. They're letting it happen organically, you're saying?
Yeah, it's happening now organically. That's a good way
Let's go through the various points. So the first one is a very difficult one, having sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. So just to understand, I think their position is to have temporary sovereignty, not sovereignty, but to be able to charge some sort of toll to make up for the damages they cause. And New York Times article puts it anywhere from $600 billion to $1 trillion in damages, which is just insane of a number. It takes so many years to be able to generate that much GDP, and to be able to destroy it in a month of bombing is just so horrific. Wars are just so stupid. But anyway, it's just to be able to generate enough money to make up for these damages, reparations. So more of a temporary solution, because a permanent solution from an international law perspective, that becomes a pretty big problem, because then any other choke point, any other country that has access to the straits, like Turkey and others that have their own straits, Malacca Straits, there's now a precedent for all these countries to enforce, to potentially leverage their their leverage, to be able to use their leverage to be able to charge a toll
Right.
on these straits as well. So that could cause a pretty big international problem. So do you think Iran wants a permanent ownership of the straits, or more of a temporary solution to make up for the damages?
Yeah, I think they'll want it permanent because they've now just, this leverage has been their potential all throughout the years, but they were never in a position to exercise it. And what's put them in a position to exercise it are the presence of drones and ballistic missiles, because they talk about trying to open the Strait of, Trump talking about opening the Strait of Hormuz. Okay, well, you go in and try to clear the mines. Good luck with that, because as you clear them, Iran can still replace the mines. You talk about wanting to seize the territory. Well, if you seize that Kemish Island, for example, which is right there at the bend of the strait, you got your troops there. How do they guarantee that the ships that are coming through are not going to get hit by a drone or missile that's launched from 300 miles inland? The only way to guarantee that won't happen is you're going to have to invade and occupy 300 miles inland. And the West is not going to do that. They can't. They don't have the manpower, and the cost would, in terms of loss of life, not to mention the economics of it, would be just too great.
But the problem is that becomes more of a global like a very, very big problem, because if I know that militarily they can do it, but militarily Turkey could do it as well with the Dardanelles and the Bosphorus Straits.
Sure.
The Strait of Malacca, you've got all the Asian in Indonesia, Malaysia that could do the same thing. Bab el-Mandeb, obviously we know that already is being happening, and the rest of them, Dover Strait, the Bering Straits as well. So you've got all these different energy choke points as well that countries could want to start implementing their sovereignty. So that's why, you know how there are certain red lines you don't cross globally, like using nuclear weapons. You don't cross this because now every country could use a nuclear weapon because that red line's been crossed. Breaking international law and enforcing a toll booth or enforcing sovereignty at a strait may not be welcomed even by countries like China that do want that global order. So wouldn't Iran agree to concede, not completely, but concede where they accept temporary, even though they can militarily enforce it? If they push too far, that's what worries me as well. If they're very emboldened after they win and they push too far, Larry, then they push the US, maybe other countries joining the US, because now they're shaking up a global, an international law that the world really needs to operate on to avoid sovereignty over international waters. So if they are emboldened, they start pushing those boundaries, that might backfire on them. That's a worry. Similar to how Trump was emboldened after Venezuela, I worry they're emboldened after this win.
Well, for starters, once the United States declared that they no longer recognize international law no longer applies. Once you've got the largest, supposedly strongest country militarily in the world saying, we can do whatever the hell we want. If we want to rape you, we can rape you. If we want to kill you, we can kill you. So what? There's no law against that. We're the strongest. So it's the law of the jungle. And so, but Iran, though, has been playing this smartly. They're not looking at a list and saying, okay, these countries are reflexively supportive of the United States. Take Japan as an example. Japan is considered a strong U.S. ally, yet Iran said, Japan, we'll work out a deal. You pay for the oil in Chinese yuan, and you can come in and get
that happened when recently?
Yeah.
Holy
so
shit.
Japan was sending 6 ships. So I see, Iran is really going to only isolate those who are the most the blind supporters of the West and of Israel. Everybody else, there's a deal to be had. And given the conduct of Donald Trump and Bibi Netanyahu, I don't think it's going to be a stretch for Iran to, reach out to other countries and cut deals with them. At the end, it's only going to be Israel and the United States looking in from the outside.
That's a very good point. Like, this is because when I spoke to the gentleman I mentioned, I can forget, I'm really bad with names, but when I spoke to the negotiator, not Alan, the other one,
Aaron David Miller.
Aaron, he's incredible. I really enjoyed my conversation with him. He's just full of knowledge. And when I had a conversation with him, he told me a scenario which I think is very likely, is that we don't reach a deal in these negotiations, and instead they'll just wither away and it becomes the new norm. It's like they just leave it unsolved. You remember how I said in our in our discussion early on, like the best thing Trump could do is walk away and leave the mess. He created the mess, but the best thing to do is not try to fix it and go dig deeper, dig the US deeper into the problem, but just walk away.
Sure.
Not ideal, maybe not fair, because the rest of the world has to solve it, but it could be the best, if not the only solution. And what Aaron said, he goes, Mario, what could happen now in these negotiations, like many things in the region, in the Middle East, they just remain unresolved. Gaza being the most heartbreaking one, Palestine. So this goes on down the same path, that every country needs to make a deal with Iran, and Iran now makes the decisions. And as long as it doesn't impact the US, so as long as the US doesn't suffer directly, and the US barely needs the Strait of Hormuz, so as long as the US doesn't suffer directly, which it won't, then it's no longer America's problem. It's a problem of the rest of the world, and countries will sort it diplomatically with Iran based on Iran's terms to an extent.
Some